Well, I think we could probably just finish church there, but because there's so much thanks that goes around, and everybody that comes and is involved. You don't know how much it means to Crystal and I. We've learned so much from you all and grown so much being with you. We love every one of you. We pray for every one of you. Most of our conversations are about you all. That's a good thing. We're not talking bad, not gossiping, but most of our time is spent talking about you all in the church and what we can do to further the kingdom. And we can't say thank you enough for our experience here and the time that we've had. We've learned so much and come to love you all, each one of you, so much. So thank you, Floyd, for that, showing us that appreciation. It means so much. Let's look at this little message here. We don't have a lot of time, but I want to speak a little bit this morning. We've had 4 weeks looking at the birth narrative and the story of Christmas, but I want to talk about the wise men, particularly today, and what it means. Let's read quickly the first 12 verses of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2, and then we'll make some comments on this. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And when he had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it was written by the prophet, But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." That's from the book of Micah. "And then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me so that I may worship him also. And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star, which they had seen in the east, went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented the gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way." This last few weeks, this is the 4th week I've been on this theme about Christmas being missed this year by so many. Christmas should be, of course, about celebrating the birth of Christ and about remembering the birth of Christ, what it means, and also what it means, the Christian faith, to our life, to our families, and remembering also other things like the songs that we love to sing and the cider that we love to drink, or the eggnog, or the meals that we've had, or the family reunions, or the pictures that we look at to remember family gatherings and past Christmases. But all of this is around the birth of Christ and the importance of it to not only each of us, but to our world and to the unity of the world. That's what it should be about. However, it seems that most people miss Christmas. They just miss it altogether. I received a holiday greeting from one of my bosses, the director of all of the graduate schools, and I just was interesting that I got it yesterday, and I opened it up, and he says, "Happy Winter Solstice." And that's true, it is that age, but it's just not the right thing to say, politically correct, to even hint at the fact that it might be Merry Christmas instead of Happy Solstice or Happy Holidays. Most people this year will miss Christmas. They'll miss the meaning of Christmas. They'll celebrate, they'll buy gifts, they'll scurry around, they'll be very busy, they'll be involved with family, they'll do a lot of rituals, but they really will miss completely the meaning of what it's all about. I was thinking about that today and how the wise men didn't miss it, and that's one of the reasons this story is there. But it's not only this year or last year or next year or 10 years from now or 10 years ago that people miss Christmas and miss the meaning. Even when Jesus was born, the first Christmas, if you will, most people missed it. Most people completely missed it. One example, just to give you one, is the innkeeper. Imagine Mary and Joseph coming to Bethlehem on the donkey, and she's with child and about to deliver. She's in labor, and they go to the innkeeper, whatever that looked like. It wasn't a Holiday Inn, but it was some kind of inn. And the innkeeper simply missed what was going on. I suspect that he was very busy with the season that it was then and the other people that were there traveling, and he had a busy inn, a full inn, and he just simply missed the fact that the most important event, can you imagine how he would feel to know that 2,000 years later his name is mentioned commonly as the innkeeper who turned them away and said, "We don't have anything open." I don't fault him for the fact that he didn't have anything open, but it doesn't say that, well, let me see that this is an important thing and your wife is in labor. Let me see if I can get somebody to move and allow you to be there. Or maybe get another room here that I would normally use, I'll give to you. Or just to at least try to recognize it. Or even to just go out and witness the miraculous birth of the Son of God. But no, he didn't. He missed it. He was preoccupied, as many people are today. Preoccupied and busy. Too busy to see the real importance of Christmas. Many others missed it. King Herod missed it. Probably because he was fearful of a king taking over his role. He didn't want another king, so he missed it. The religious leaders missed it, often because of their love of the ritual of their religion or for prideful reasons. The people in Nazareth missed it because they were in the hometown with Joseph and Mary, yet they didn't even walk 15 miles to witness the greatest event ever that 2,000 years later we would still be talking about. If you think about it, it's pretty amazing that so many people who were right there and could have witnessed the most important event ever that changed the calendar and the rest of time didn't see it. They missed the significance of it. They missed the birth. But yet, 3 wise men, we're told, didn't miss it and actually made real strides to be present and get it. We know that the paintings and the postcards that you see about the wise men that are talked about here, it shows them on camel, dressed in really sharp dressed garb, perhaps even amazingly dressed. They seem to have crowns and turbans and really bright clothes. I mean, Calvin Klein would like to have his name on them, I'm sure, because their clothes were quite fascinating as they ride camels across the desert, is what the pictures show. That's how the artists have illustrated it. That's how the songs have illustrated it. That's how the tradition has illustrated. 3 wise men on camel riding across the desert to see this baby, this birth, guided by a star, and they traveled, it says, from afar. So there's 3 points I want to make about this morning. Who are these men? What is their mission? And what's the meaning? Okay, so the men, who are they? The mission, what was it and why? And meaning, what does it matter to us today that they did this? So first, the men. Who were these wise men? Not a lot is told us in the Scripture as who these wise men were. The text doesn't give us a lot of detail about who they are, so we're much left to tradition and to history from secular history as to who these men are. And you might be amazed at some of the history we have to actually know who they were and how it is important Tradition tells us enough to make some reasonable deductions about who these men were. Again, the painters and the poets and the songwriters illustrate them as being duded up in great garb. I don't know if that's the most comfortable way to ride a camel across the desert dressed like that, but they apparently were dressed great, which tells us they were probably very wealthy and of royal lineage, and certainly important people. They were not poor or peasants. These were wealthy, smart, wise men who were known as both scientists and theologians in their day. And they brought important gifts. And we say there were three. We really don't know that. If you notice, the text doesn't say there were three wise men. It just says the wise men. There were wise men that traveled from the east. It doesn't tell us there were three, but it says there were three gifts. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh, which is where the gift giving starts. And we do that today. We should remember that's where it comes from, that they brought gifts. And so we give gifts today based on that tradition. But there were three gifts, so we come to think there were three men. There may have been 12 wise men, there may have been 2, but tradition tells us there really were 3. The song that says, "We 3 kings of Wyant are," I guess that sounds better than "we 2 men" or "we 12 men," I don't know. But it wouldn't sound right if we didn't say these 3 men of we 3 kings. But tradition tells us that there were 3 men and they had names, and their names were Melchior, Gaspar, and Belshazzar. Those were the names that we're told they were, and we're told that they were wise scholars of their day. Yes, not just your average guy. These were astronomers, scientists, the smartest of men in that area of Persia and or Iran area today. The smartest men who would be called scientists, but yet also theologians. They were scientific theologians, if you will. They both knew the Scriptures, they knew the prophecies, they knew the Bible very well. They had to have, to do this, to go out on this trek of 800 miles across the desert to find this baby and be right about it. They had to know the Scriptures, but they also had to know the planetary bodies and the stars, to know that this star, this planetary cosmic event, stellar event, was something special. So they had to be both scientists and theologians, and so we'll call them scientific theologians, because they both knew the Bible well, and they knew science as well as anybody did in that day, including astronomy and the skies and what they could expect. And they were men of wealth, well educated for their day. You might be interested to know that it's not all guesswork that these 3 wise men came from Iraq or Iran and went on a trek 800 miles, basically 2 months long, to get from Iran or Iraq to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. It's about a 2-month process. If you think by camel, you might go 20 miles a day, approximately. I don't know. I've never ridden a camel like that. But guessing that, it would take about 2 months to get there across the desert. And we're told that this is likely the case. Marco Polo, in about 1200, he was an explorer and a merchant, and he's very well documented his explorations and his trips. And when he went to a small town in, again, this was 1200, so this is about 1,000 years after the event, but 1,000 years before our time. He went to a small town in Iran, Persia, if you will, and he was told there that this is the town where the 3 magi came from. And Marco Polo was a Christian, and so he said, "You talking about the 3 wise men of the Bible?" And they said, "Oh yes, they're buried here. Melchior, Belshazzar, and so forth. Gaspar, the 3 wise men who made the trek over to see the baby Jesus. They came from our town, and we've always known that. The tradition tells us that, and they're buried here." And Marco Polo wrote about that in his writings, meeting and seeing the burial place of the 3 wise men. So in fact, maybe there were 3 wise men, and in fact, maybe they came from Persia. We've often thought they came from Babylon, which is Iraq today, which those countries were somewhat together at times. We know that Daniel and the Jewish people were taken out of Jerusalem and taken in exile over to Iraq at the time, Babylon. And and of course the Medo-Persians conquered that area, and that all became one area. And that country, including Babylon and Iran today, was left many Jews there, right? So we would have had a historical basis for these wise men, these scientific astrologers, scientific theologians, if you will, to have been living in Babylon, Iraq, Persian area, from the lineage of Daniel perhaps, but certainly from the Jewish people, because they were Jewish and they knew about the Scriptures, but they also knew science. And I think it's fascinating that they saw no reason to separate the prophecies and the Scriptures from science. Today, we see the opposite. We see the fact that if you're a scientist, it's very difficult to be a theologian. If you're a theologian, you're usually not a scientist, because these two things don't generally mix in our universities today. But in their day, they were certainly educated both in the Scriptures and in science. So Daniel 2 tells us the stone would come and conquer all the kingdoms of the world. They knew that, and that stone would be a Messiah. And they knew that was coming. The prophet Balaam from Numbers says, a star will mark the coming of the king. So they had put together that they were looking for a star, a stellar event of some kind, that would show up and point them to the birth of the Messiah. So they knew from the Scriptures that it would happen. They knew it would be probably in Bethlehem, because Micah says that. But they had to speculate a bit. But these gentlemen were smart enough both in astronomy and in prophecy to come up with this answer. Perhaps they were given dreams from God, I don't know. But for whatever reason, they correctly sufficed and deduced that in fact there was a birth, and they could follow the star to find it. So that's who they were. They were wise men, they were scientists, they were theologians. And they speculated accurately and used their intellectual ability and their faith together to pursue this mission. Likely they were from Persia. Likely they were from the lineage of the Jews from Daniel's time, 600 years prior. And likely they had no problem whatsoever mixing their knowledge of science with their knowledge of faith. So that's who they were. What about the mission? Those are the men. The mission was, these men were deadly serious about what they were doing. I started out talking about missing Christmas. Most people will miss Christmas this year. Most people will miss it their entire life, because they'll never see the importance of Jesus' birth and what it means to us, or they'll be apathetic to it because they've heard it over and over, and it's just, yeah, I know that story, it doesn't mean anything to me. It'll just sort of bounce off of them. Or they will fear the consequences of it, that it might make them change their life, so they'll avoid it. Or like the innkeeper, they may just be too busy and distracted in dealing with business and not take time. But the point is, most will miss it. But these gentlemen were deadly serious about not missing it. And I think that's partly why it's in the Bible. He could have not done this story. He could have not included it, but he included it because it's important to tell us not everybody missed it. Not everybody missed it. Yes, a lot of people did, but yes, there were some who didn't miss it and were so deadly serious about it that they not only saw the cosmic stellar event, but they also followed it and journeyed 800 miles by camel, a 2-month trek, to follow it, both their faith and follow the star. Now think about that for a minute. These are wise men. They're smart men. They have families. I'm imagining some conversation like, well, me and Gaspar and Melchior are going to head out tomorrow, and we're going to go to Jerusalem over that way and follow a star wherever it takes us. And we don't know how long it might be. It might be a month. It might be 6 months. It might be a year. But we're going to follow it to take us to the birth of a king. I'm not sure that the wife will go along with that one. She might say, have you guys been having those meetings again talking about that stuff? And they would have to say, yeah, we've been getting together playing cards and talking about theology, and we think that actually this really is going to be it. Now, you've thought that before. Yeah, but this time we really believe it's true. We've seen the stellar body. We believe that is the marker, and we're going to follow it to where it takes us, and we really believe that the prophecies are pointing us this way. It would have taken faith. It would have taken judgment. They were wise and they were right. But it would have also taken a lot of faith to believe. So their mission was to get on camel, and the three of them traveled together across the desert, 800 miles, and follow it where it take them. And that's exactly what they did. So what did they follow? They followed, it's called a star. I don't know if it was a star. There's a lot of theories about what it was. Some people say it was Venus, the planet Venus. Some people say it was a constellation of a few planets. Some people say it was a comet. Some people say it was a meteor. Some people say it was a constellation of multiple planets coming together. Some people say that it was in fact a nova or a supernova. Doug and I have talked a lot about that. We've interviewed astronomers and modern day scholars about it on God Talk, trying to figure it out. It's interesting. It's fun. At the end of the day, we don't know for sure. Maybe it was a supernatural phenomenon. Some people say it was a UFO. I don't think so, but some people say that. They say, I don't know. There's a million theories. What was this star that they followed? One of the scholars that I read about this week says it was a nova, and in fact, there are Chinese astronomers, interesting enough, that in 4 BC, their history, of course this is Chinese history, says in 4 BC there was a very bright stellar event that they described as a nova to them in the west, so it would have been there in the east, following that way over Jerusalem. So perhaps it was a nova, a bright nova, a star that became very bright and then burned out. I don't know. But whatever it was enough that the Magi, the wise men, would follow it. The prophecies from, again, Balaam and Numbers and from Daniel and from Malachi all come together for them to believe this is it, this is the time, and we need to go. And so their mission was to find this king. And so I was thinking this week about this, that people who find God begin their quest in many different ways, don't they? The wise men sought out, they're going to find him, and they'll go there to find him. They didn't know what they would find exactly, but they started a quest to find God. Jeremiah says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. You will seek me and find me when you seek me and find me. You will find me with all your heart, if you seek me with all your heart. That's what they did. If you think about it, they were deadly serious about this. They were convicted about it. They probably had to deal with some ridicule, but they were serious about finding God. And the point being that we all start in different places trying to find God, but we all end up, if we're seeking him with all our heart, sincerely, in the same place, at Christ, at the person of Jesus. Some people are blessed with God-fearing parents, many of you, and brought up in the church and hear the message, and it sticks, or it sticks for a while and then you come back later. But somehow your parents or your grandmother or your grandfather or your uncle modeled Christianity for you. Others have to find it through apologetics or reasoning or asking questions. Others find it through experiencing God in some way. Others experience a miracle or a supernatural thing they can't explain. Some people hear it from a revival. Other people hear it or find it or seek God when they hit bottom because there's nowhere else to look but up. They're that low. Some people find God in jail. Some people find God many different ways where they start. And these men started as wise, scientific theologians seeking after this star and being deadly serious about it. I think that's an important message for us, in knowing that wherever we start, God sees to it that we end up in the right place, and He led them there with the star. We don't have the star to follow, but we have His Word. We have His Spirit to guide us, and if we are seeking Him sincerely with all our heart, He will give us a star to follow. He will give us the Spirit to guide us, and He will bring us to the right place if we seek Him in spirit and truth. So what draws the sinner and the sage to God? I don't know. The Spirit, the star, the jail, a bottom experience, an uncle, a grandparent, a parent, who knows? Whatever it is that brought you or started you to ask questions, that may be what it was. I've told you many times, for me, it's, I've often said, you're either drawn to God by the light drawing you, or you're pushed by the heat. Okay? You're either drawn by the light or burned by the heat. Personally, I would have rather been drawn by the light, but I was burned by the heat. And when I wasn't living the way I should have been living, I witnessed both the birth of a baby and the death of a 24-year-old man that shouldn't have died in the same day, or relatively within 24 hours. And I remember those things happening and hitting me in a way to think, this birth process that I see all the time, that I've come to take for granted, is so amazing. And yet, what is this baby going to do? What's the point of the life? And then not long after that, I see the death of a 24-year-old man from a coal mining accident that shouldn't have died, and I began to ask questions. And so I was probably motivated or driven by the heat rather than drawn by the light. But either way, one of the two will bring us to the same place, and the wise men were drawn by the light. They were drawn by the light. So that's what got them there, and they ended up in the right place with the right motive. But what is the meaning? We have the men, 3 wise men. We have the mission, the trek, following the light, drawn by the light. What about the meaning? Well, a couple points and we'll finish. God is the Most High God of all the universe. I think they put this story, this event that happened, it's a true story, but why they included it, because it could have included many things they didn't. I think they included it for a lot of reasons. One, to tell us these men were from the East. They were not from Israel. They were not Jewish. They may have had Jewish traditions, but they were from the East, and for all we know, they were from the Eastern Zoroastrian religion. We don't know. But they weren't from the same area, yet they were drawn. They were drawn by the Scriptures. They were drawn by the star. They were drawn by the light. And He's telling us that God is the God of all people. Jews, Gentiles, all tribes, all languages. And in this Christmas season, we need to remember that. We need to remember that it is all people, not just Americans, not just a certain ethnicity, but all economic groups are important to God, Eastern, Western, North, or South. His plan was always to reach the whole world, not just one group, through this king. And it explains to us that our similarities are more important to God than our differences. But you would think otherwise if you turn on the news today. Our differences are what define us so often. The conflict that you see in the government right now, which we haven't even watched the news recently, but we heard about it. We missed it because we've been so busy with the holiday and traveling. But The differences, it seems, often are what define us, and it shouldn't be. It's our similarities. It's the image of God in each of us. It's our sin nature. It's our need for salvation, our need for a king. Those are the things that are similar to all of us, and He defines that in every one of us, not the differences. I think that's one of the reasons that this is important to us. Matthew includes it to remind us of the universality, let me say, of God. And although we're diverse, we are unified in Christ. Secondly, the supernatural aspect of Jesus' birth. This was no normal birth. I mean, as I said before, the birth itself wasn't particularly interesting. We didn't have an abnormal labor curve or a C-section or an obstetrician beamed in or anything like that. Likely she didn't have a midwife or a doctor. She delivered herself and laid the baby with the shreds of clothes in the manger. That's the way God chose to come into the world. But so many supernatural things. The shepherds, told by the host of angels, were sent there. The wise men, how? How did they get there? By prophecy and by the star, a supernatural stellar event. The geography of Bethlehem. Caesar Augustus gets Mary and Joseph in the right place to have the baby because the Bible says the baby must be born in Bethlehem, not in Nazareth. So that gets them there. The star, the prophecy, all pointing to a supernatural incarnation, God being in the skin of a man. And it's the only path to salvation, that God-man that we get in that birth. It's a cosmic event that changed the world. So that's another reason. Thirdly, the importance of seeking after God. I said either we're drawn by the light or burned by the heat, but either way, we're driven to ask questions that we wouldn't otherwise ask, that we wouldn't otherwise care about. But we begin to ask questions, and these wise men were deeply serious about asking questions and finding answers. They were obedient and willing to submit to God's call, and the vast majority of many Christians never see that or never do that, often because if they submit, they're afraid of it, but in fact, they miss out on the greatest gift God has for them. And last, it magnifies the importance of Jesus Christ. I think that we know that His birth is phenomenal, and that's why we celebrate Christmas. But in fact, this story of the wise men coming from the east and following this amazing event, this star, and coming to the actual location and then giving gifts and worshiping. It says they fell down on their faces and worshiped Jesus. It magnifies the importance of this birth. He's not just a man, but yet God-man. An 800-mile trek was worth it to see this baby and to worship this king. And of course, they didn't go back and tell Herod. They went another way because they knew his aspirations were not good. Herod was dying from a skin-eating disease, a flesh-eating disease. Today we know what that is. It's a bacterial infection. Back then they didn't know, but he was probably about 6 months from his death at that time, and so he died about 6 months later, but they did not